So I'd like to introduce our presenter, Steve, KI5ENW. Thanks for the name tag.
All right. You're welcome. I got to get a new name tag. This one says Dallas, and really, I need a new one. But I don't know whether it's going to say Monument or Colorado Springs yet.
You can say wait.
What I do know is it ain't going to say Dallas anymore. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. They say no good deed goes unpunished. So I tried to sneak up here into Colorado without anyone finding out. But then I foolishly made the mistake of going up to the ham radio outlet store in Denver in a blizzard late last year because we had a shipping problem I had to resolve for them. And they ratted on me. And they told Lauren that I was in town. And then Lauren tracked me down. And then he called me up and he said, Steve, in April, we have these club meetings every month, and we can't find any decent speakers at all for the month of April. So I thought maybe you could do it instead. And I thought, that's nice, isn't it? So I'm here both as a new member of this club, I hope. I signed the sheet. Although what Trish didn't tell any of you other people that are new to the club, all you have to do is sign up, right? And then you're a member of the club. What she didn't say was, if you show up to next month's meeting, you will get assigned action items. So, and I say that as someone that just signed up myself, okay? But that's the way clubs all work. You get used to that.
Before you even remember.
Yeah, I know. There's no hope, is there? So, I regard myself as somewhat of an evangelist for software-defined radios. Even though I work for SDRPlay, my goal in life, and I go around all the shows and stuff, and my goal is, if you don't know what an SDR is, I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to tell you why you want one. And then I don't care if you buy one from SDRPlay or whether you buy one from somebody else. As long as you get one, I guarantee you won't regret it. So the first thing I wanted to do was quick show of hands. Who has any idea of what the concept of software-defined radio is? Okay, because this is good, because my talk is an introduction, and I've got a fancy laser pointer here, which you can't see when I shine it at a TV screen. Isn't that clever? So, and it also advances and moves the slides backwards, but usually in the opposite order to what I'm trying to do. So I can minimize telling you stuff you already know, which is great, because then we can get on to the good stuff. Okay. So that's good. I'd also like to try and give some demos both on this laptop and this one, and with the miracles of Zoom and everything else. And I can just rest assured that if I get really stuck, Bob's going to come and help me out. So given that everybody here knows what software-defined radio is, it makes it easy. But what I was going to do was get my revenge on Lauren, because I understand he gave a talk on software-defined radio a month or so back. So I could just sit down because I'm really dry from the altitude, and he can get up and give the talk instead of me. I don't see you leaping out of your seat. Okay. So let's, okay. So you all know what this is, right? I mean, software-defined radio is really a huge catch-all term that means different things depending on how you apply it. But some things all software-defined radios have in common, and that is you start with a good old-fashioned analog front end to amplify signals from the antenna, and then what you try and do is you try and digitize that signal as soon as possible and then send it off to some sort of host computer, because we all know that digital is wonderful and you can do all sorts of great manipulations and everything else. So all the tricks happen in software, basically. But the front end is not quite as simple as you might think. Was that a question? I wasn't sure if you're ready, but thanks for reminding me, because I'm happy to take questions as we go along. And I'm going to try and scoot through the slides fairly quickly so that we can have some demos. But if there's anything that kind of resonates with anybody as we go along, just holler and I can, try and explain it to the best of my ability. It shouldn't take very long at all. So I guess the other point I would like to make is, and I don't know if this is going to be the best slide for that or the next one. Okay, Letterman's not on TV anymore, but you're all old enough to remember when Letterman was on, right? So he used to do the top 10 lists. So there's my top 10 lists of why you want an SDR radio. The bottom line being number 10, can you ever have too many radios? Does anyone disagree with that? I will have to ask you to leave. Okay. So there's a lot of advantages to having a software-defined radio. Like I say, it's because you can do it all using computer horsepower and stuff. You can make really good filters and everything else. Obviously, my pitch is going to be, well, I skipped some slides. That's good. What I really want to do is show you some application examples specifically of the SDRPlay radios, of which I've got one here that's kind of hooked up. Maybe we can get it running later. I got some little flyers here to hand out. I didn't print enough because I couldn't believe that more than 3 people were going to show up tonight for this meeting. Obviously, they've never seen me give a talk before. But you can hand them around or you can help yourself to them later. It just explains the feature sets of our radios, okay? Tricia already has a copy of that flyer, and all these slides I'm showing you, and then some more, which I assume will end up on the website or somewhere at some point. So everything I'm showing you tonight, you'll get to look at, and you can kind of take it in at your own pace later on. So things about software-defined radio. And let me just show you some of the things we can do, and then maybe when I talk about specific radios, we can get into it. And these are just quick examples of using our radios, our software with some add-on stuff. So the first one is just an example of doing weather faxes on HF. I don't know if any of you people do HF weather fax stuff. There are a number of add-ons to our software that will enable you to do that. Black Cat Systems is a company out of Florida. You actually have to pay for their product, but most of the stuff I'm going to show you today is free. So you can get some really cute weather faxes, and that's kind of a fun application. What else have I got? Multi-PSK. Okay, I heard the magic word digital out of Bob's mouth earlier, wasn't it? Or was it you, Tricia? It was you. You mentioned everyone's interested in digital. Multi-PSK is a software program that has been around for some time and is useful for decoding a whole bunch of different digital modes. Okay, I think it does DRM, but I'm not 100% sure. But again, it's something that you can combine with our radios, and I don't know what that part is on the right. I don't know if that's part of multi-PSK or an add-on. This screenshot actually came from a colleague of mine, Mike Ladd, who is our rep down in Florida. Okay, digital again, WSJTX. If you're doing, everybody seems to be into FT8 and stuff these days. WSJTX is very good for that. On the right, you see the map with the contacts, and that's a program called Grid Tracker. So if you want to get into digital, this is an easy way to get into it. What else have we got? This is an incredibly powerful piece of software called CSV User List Browser. You'll probably have a hard time seeing it on the screen because there's a tiny little map down there, but it's cool because you can have it show your local time or UTC, and it shows you, you can see where it's light and where it's dark, so you'll have some idea of what propagation is going to be like. And it has a ton of information that enables you to identify stations that you're listening to or talking to.
Steve, are these applications that are embedded into the SDRPlay app?
No. When I mentioned like CSV User List Browser, WSJTX, they're all add-ons that can be interfaced to our app. Okay. And when I get to an appropriate point, I'll try and illustrate how that would be done. This one, I hope I can actually show you on this laptop later. You're familiar with ADSB, which are the transponders from aircraft. They transmit at 1.09 gigahertz. Again, our radios go all the way up to 2 gigahertz. So you can pick up those transponders directly, and using a piece of software called Virtual Radar Server. Again, it's an add-on piece of software, but it's free. You can actually plot where the aircraft are on the map, and you can see the headings and all sorts of information about the aircraft, what their heading is, what their N number is, altitude, speed, and all that good stuff. And that's a lot of fun to play with. One of our radios, the one here, has actually got 2 tuners in it. So it allows you to tune the 1.09 gigahertz for picking up transponders. And you can also tune to 130 odd megahertz and listen to air traffic control at the same time, which is really cool. Ham Radio Deluxe. Anyone use Ham Radio Deluxe? Okay, great. So you can integrate with Ham Radio Deluxe. It's still a bit messy at the moment, but I've done 2 app notes showing you how to do it. So if you use the HRD logbook function, which I imagine what a lot of you do, or maybe you use DM780 for some digital decoding, you can bring that into the party as well. You can control your rig. You can see the spectrum in the SDR Uno software, and you get a nice big integrated solution. It's really cool. The NOAA weather satellites at 137 megahertz. And again, these are pictures that were provided by our users. And one of the guys down in Florida, there was a hurricane. I forget which name it was. I don't think it's on the. Is which one? Dorian? Yeah, that sounds right. Did it say on that? Anyway, using a program called W0TLM, you can take that data from the satellites and produce weather maps like that. 137 megahertz, you don't even need too fancy an antenna. Some people have even done it just using a disco type antenna. And the GO satellites up at 1.7 gigahertz, they allow you to produce imagery of the entire globe. And the fact that this is done by a guy called Byrne using one of our, he's up in north of Dallas in Plano. He did these. His hobby is making fancy antennas for these frequencies and stuff. And he's got all those circular polarized helical antennas and stuff. And he uses that to pick them up. But he does it with a very modest one of our older radios. And when I see some of these pictures, and I think that our base radio is like $100 for a little black plastic box. And to be able to do all this stuff just blows my mind. Perhaps I should mention, I've been around for a long time, but all I used to do was listen to shortwave radio. Done that for years, starting with an old Raycal RA17 and stuff. Went through some YASAR general coverage receivers. And I guess it's 7 or 8 years ago now, a guy I went to school with back in England called me up and said, "Hey, we've got this new software-defined radio thing. Would you like help to help us sell it in the US? Can you find a marketing channel? We're selling it direct from our website, and we think there should be a much bigger market in the US. Can you arrange that for us, set up a distribution channel?" So I did, and we signed a deal with Ham Radio Outlet, and they're actually our exclusive distributor, and they've done a really good job for us. So that's where you can buy our radios from. Here's another useful tool for those of you that like to play in the shack and stuff, checking out filters. Perhaps you design your own filters and stuff. You can make one of our boxes into a spectrum analyzer. And basically, using this, again, this is free software from an Australian guy called Steve. I notice there's a lot of Steves in this club. Could we change everybody else's name to be Steve as well to avoid confusion? Yeah. It's better than Bruce, right? So anyway, you essentially get a lab tool out of that same $100 plastic box if you want to use it for that. So that's basically, for those of you that may not be totally familiar with what's possible to be done these days, like I wasn't, coming from a shortwave listening background. This whole digital thing was a complete mystery to me. And then I start hearing there's things called DMR, which is not to be confused with DRM, which is used for broadcast stations, mostly in Europe, and then the FT8s and all that stuff. What I didn't show you is anyone into trunking, P25, that kind of stuff. There's a program that's quite popular called Unitrunker, which flat doesn't work with our radios, but there's another program called SDR Trunk, and the author of that has recently added support for the RSP radios that we provide. And it's multi-platform as well. It's Windows, Mac, Linux, and it works really well. And I've been working closely with the author because in his first manifestation, it wasn't exactly easy to optimize the performance with our radios. So that's another option for you as well. And I have been monitoring some of the emergency services and the utilities down in the Springs, which is where I'm living right now, basically using nothing more than my famous blue wire antenna. You impressed with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. You all know, right, that it has to be blue because blue has much better reception characteristics. Okay. And of course, our radios run all the way from 1 kilohertz, so way down VLF, all the way up to 2 gigahertz. And of course, antennas should be cut, right, for best performance. So this is exactly how long it needs to be for optimum performance from 1 kilohertz to 2 gigahertz. That's story number one. Story number two, I just needed something to check out the radio to see if it was working. So I went into my shop and reached into the junk box and pulled out a piece of wire that was this long and this color. But some people will believe anything. But I did learn one thing since I got back into this hobby. If you put a regular banana plug on a piece of wire, it fits perfectly into an SO239. You guys probably knew that already, but it was new to me. So it's perfect quick disconnect. Another trick, little crocodile clip on the end. It's electrically connected to the wire. That's important. Okay. I travel a fair bit. Okay. So when I'm sitting in the hotel room or anywhere for that matter, I get out my blue wire antenna. Sometimes if you clip it to a metal window frame, you get better reception. Sometimes if you jam it in the ground outlet on the AC mains, you get good reception. I'm not brave enough to try the neutral, but sometimes the ground actually helps. So, but sometimes, if you're on a metal frame building, sometimes it helps. Sometimes it doesn't help, in which case you can just clip it to a curtain or something. But one of the myths, I did a little video that's on our website somewhere. We do a lot of videos and stuff. And my colleague, Mike, he's a very enthusiastic ham and does a lot of really good videos and stuff. On the other hand, I do a fair few videos more for comic relief than anything else, where I talk about, myths about SDRs. You need a special antenna. And that's one reason why I'm trying to demo this, is just to show that you don't. Now, I'm not going to do any DXing with this thing, not in a month of Sundays. But people say they've got their radio, they've turned it on, they've got the software going, and it doesn't work. Do I need a special antenna? It's like, no. You guys, you're hams already, so you've probably got all sorts of wonderful beam antennas and God knows what up on a tower, 300 feet high. And no, I tell you, because I had a very modest setup at my house in Dallas. I had a magnetic loop, an MFJ loop, 1866, I think is the number, mounted about this high. There's a nice thing about vertical loops is they don't need to be super high. In a very high noise area between my house and my neighbors. And it was amazing. It was so much better than the random wire I had strung out across the yard before that. And then my second antenna was a discone. That may be an MFJ as well. I don't know. I just went up to HRI and said, give me the cheapest discone you've got. So I got this discone and I bolted it to a pole that put up on the chimney. Okay. Between those two antennas, I've got pretty good coverage over everything. I can go from NDBs down in the LF part of the spectrum. I can go up through the VHF and UHF bands. I don't think I'm going to make any pretty satellite pictures. Maybe on the NOAA, the 137 megahertz ones. But the equipment can be modest. And I'm not putting down people that specialize in building antennas and spend a lot of time on it. I mean, if that's your part of the hobby, you will get a better result than I will throwing a piece of wire out of the window. There's no doubt about it. But I do want to dispel the myth that you need something fancy just because it's an SDR and not an ICOM whatever, or a Yaesu whatever. I'm not going to say Elecraft. Is there anything against Elecraft here? We've got K3 people. Okay. I own a Kenwood. Anyone going to throw me out? Actually, I don't own it. It's on permanent loan from Kenwood. Contrary to popular belief, rumors of the death of Kenwood have been grossly exaggerated. They've been in a kind of a lull. I have it on good authority, although I need to chat to my buddy Phil again. I think they will be at the Dayton Hamfest this year. I know they skipped Hancation down in Florida. And I often share a booth with them because I guess I should get on with this. What time did you want me to finish? That clock hasn't moved for the last 3 hours. So I guess I'm still on time. That one, yeah, okay. So anyway, have I blabbered on enough about that? So let's talk about the hardware a little bit. The variety of SDRs you can get, and I don't know which. Let me put these glasses on. I can see a bit better. So if you've looked at SDRs at all, you will know that you can get these little RTL SDR dongle things that you can plug into a USB port, and basically you've got an SDR at that point. And some of them are really cheap, $20, even less in some cases. Typically, they're characterized by having 8-bit performance. Now, what does 8-bit mean? Well, I could go back to a previous life. I lived at Texas Instruments, where analog to digital converter specs were, I mean, it's just ridiculous. People talk about resolution. People talk about equivalent numbers of bits. In general, the more bits, the better. And also, in general, the more bits you get, the better the dynamic range you get. And the reason that's important is because that gives you a lot of tolerance when a strong signal comes in, that it doesn't completely saturate the A to D and just give you essentially a clipped output. Okay, so the dongles, they're like 8 bits. They're good for what they do. There's nothing fancy about them, and it's certainly a good introduction. So again, if I'm evangelizing, whatever, if I'm promoting SDRs, I don't mind if you go and buy a dongle. If I'm at a Hamfest or something and there's a little flea market and someone wants to go buy a $10 dongle, that's fine. I'd much rather they bought one of mine, because if we don't sell at least 5 at a show or something, they're going to fire me. I don't know what it is. I'm retired anyway. This is part-time for fun for me. So the next level up, you get to the you're talking 10, maybe 14 bits range. We're in that range. If you've heard of AirSpy and their Discovery and Discovery HF radios, they're similar sort of performance. I guess you could say we're mortal enemies, but again, I don't care. If you want to buy an AirSpy, they make some pretty good radios. I can think of some features on ours that I think are better than theirs, and they probably have some features they think are better than ours. So whatever. So there's a sort of mid-range, and really you're talking in the $100 to $300 range that give you what this chart's trying to show you is a big increase in performance for not that much more money. I mean, you go into HRO and tell me you're going to walk out without spending less than $100. How do you manage that unless you just needed a connector? And then there's the big step where you go all the way to the right and you spend up literally thousands of dollars to get the absolute maximum performance, which may be 16 bits of resolution or whatever, or maybe, and again, our radios are all just receivers, and I'll get back to that in a minute. You can also apply SDR techniques to transmitters, although that's somewhat less useful. But Flex, for example, they were based in Austin, Texas, I guess, just a little bit south of me. They make some fantastic transceivers using SDR techniques. The only thing more fantastic than how well their radios perform is the size of the price tags. Okay. But, some people say they're even better than Elecraft. I couldn't possibly say. I'm going to get thrown out now. So, you pay your money and you take your choice. And perhaps now is a good time. Let's see what the next slide shows. I'm not used to not having it. Okay. There's a lot of words here. I don't even know if you can read this stuff, but the bottom line is, let's see, because I got this and I think I'm tethered, but I'm not. So we make little black boxes. And at the end of the day, these little black boxes are basically no different than my old FRG 7700 from Yaesu, which was a general coverage receiver. But whereas my Yaesu went up to 30 megahertz, these things will tune from 1 kilohertz to 2 gigahertz. That's a hell of a range. Not only that, anywhere within that range, you can look at up to 10 megahertz of that range at any one time. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you guys, you work HF and stuff, right? So if you're working 20 meters or 40 meters or whatever, the band is 300 kilohertz wide. So you can easily use one of these to visualize the entire band you're working on. Now, you can look at 20, 30, and 40 meters all at once on these things too. And you can either put them in one big window, going from 7 megahertz up to 14, whatever, or, and I may even have a slide here, you can have 3 separate virtual receivers in our software. You can have one on 20 meters, one on 30 meters, one on 40 meters. And you can look at each band and see what the activity's like. You can tune into it and listen to it. And if you have your HF rig sitting next to it, if you see something you like in one of those bands, you can click on that signal and it will tune your rig to that same frequency. I mean, it is just mind-blowing to me to see that happening. And when you compare that to turning the knob, hoping to hear somebody going CQ, or whatever, or radio check. I'd like to do a mic check, but is there a light on my mic? So I don't know if I covered all these things. Basically, depending on things like sample rate and stuff, these things are 10 to 14-bit conversion. Here's a key thing. You guys all know what a superhet radio is, right? Like dual conversion and all that. So what you do is you start with everything from DC to blue light coming in down your antenna. And then what you first want to do, you go into the first IF and you want to get rid of all that stuff, narrow it down. Then you're going to go to another second IF and you're going to narrow it down still more so that any noise that was floating around there that you're not interested in listening to has gone by the time you've been through the second IF. Okay. The goal for us is a little bit different because we want to see 10 megahertz of spectrum at once. And that is a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is, especially if you've got strong AM broadcast stations in the vicinity, they can mix with the HF signals you're listening to and generates all sorts of spurious products in the band you're trying to listen to. So one of the key things we learned after our very first radios came out is the band select filters ahead of the A to D are very important. So we try and tailor the filter response to keep out-of-band signals as far away as possible, which has the added benefit of stopping them from overloading the A to D and giving you, it'd be like a clip signal, right? And the signal just goes to pots. So we've got these nice pre-select filters in there, which we've incrementally increased with every model that's come out. I talked about model bands. Are you guys all Windows people, or have we got any Mac people here? Mac? I'm a Mac guy. I am the Mac guy. And for those of you that are Mac users, little secret, those little educational videos I do on SDRPlay.com, they were all done on a Mac. Even running the Windows software on a Mac in a virtual machine. Anyone here a Linux person? Damn, there's 5 of you guys. I've got to ask to leave now. I don't know why you guys do it. There are some really smart people that do really good things with Linux.
Steve, a couple of years ago, I was dabbling with Unix, and the SDR Uno had a counterpart that was Linux-based, but it wasn't as full-featured as the...
There's several. There's a piece of software called Cubic SDR, which is multi-platform, which is a very simple, straightforward. I don't know if I've even got a slide on it. There is at least one slide in the version I've left behind. The thing about Cubic is, and it runs on the Pi very well as well. In SDR Uno, which is our main software, which is Windows-based, you almost distracted me from Linux there. Okay, very clever. But you can have up to 16 virtual receivers, and I'll probably be able to show you that, which would be like multiple VFOs, up to 16. But what I found really cool about Cubic was when I lived in Dallas, I have like airports all around, okay? So there's a lot of air traffic control stuff going on. And what Cubic lets you do is, instead of calling them VFOs, the guy that wrote Cubic, he's Canadian, if that explains anything, he calls them modems. But you can have multiple modems set up across the band, and you can set the squelch level independently for each one. so that you can have, I've got a picture somewhere. I've got 20 different ATC frequencies on the screen at once, but I only hear them when they break through the squelch when someone's transmitting, which is a really cool feature that none of the other packages I'm aware of can do. GQRX is another one on Linux. If you're into GNU Radio Companion, you can do all sorts of clever things for that. And I leave that up to the university students. I played with it once, and after only 2 days of solid work, I was able to build an AM receiver locked onto one frequency and one frequency only. Linux has got to be the most frustrating experience in your entire life. And I don't use it. I sometimes open up a terminal window on the Mac and I can type grep and sudo get lost and, sudo apt get screwed. Your question.
In the vein of making a little bit less frustration, SDRPlay drivers been Linux?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's planned or not. There are, the Linux drivers are available. Our API specification is there, and the drivers and everything have been used. It's not open source. No, it won't fit under the GNU license thing or whatever. No, it won't. SDR++ is another recent multi-platform piece of software that's come out. Our own software, SDR Connect, which if I don't insult enough of you, I've insulted Linux people, I've insulted Elecraft people. Who wants to be next up for an insult? So anyway, didn't I insult you already, Bob? I'll work on it. Okay. I was going to talk a bit about nets. I was thinking more like fishing, not the internet. I was thinking more like fishing. Have you been in the net? No, I managed to wriggle free. So no, we're never going to open source our drivers. I know that for a fact. But that doesn't mean that the API cannot be used freely. If you go to our website, you can see the exact licensing terms and the specifications available for one and all. I mentioned SDR++ because the author, used it to generate what he was doing. We've got a support group on groups.io, and there are some very savvy Linux people on there that help out other people. But when I see somebody come in and they say, well, I'm not really a programmer, I'm just a user, and I just can't get this to run on Linux, and I don't know what it means when it says CMake and all this other stuff. And it's like, I'm sorry, guy, but like me, you shouldn't be messing with Linux. I know my limitations. I leave that up to the smart people. And what they do is nothing short of miraculous. There's a guy called, what's his name? Frank. And he's got some really long sounding last name. And he wrote modules for GNU Radio Companion for all our radios so that you have access to that if you want to use them in GNU Radio Companion. But please don't come and ask me for tech support because I am lost. Okay, so we talked about other platforms. There's some other stuff that's been out there a while. Some of you may be familiar with HD SDR. It's another basic SDR program. It's fairly easy to use. SDR console. It's another piece of software written by another damn Brit, so you probably don't want to mess with it. But it's a very capable piece of software that a lot of people really love. That supports it. I mentioned some of the other Mac and Linux stuff. Raspberry Pi. You probably don't. I should have taken ours as download our SD card image. It's kind of out of date. I've been trying to use it on a Pi 400 recently. There's all sorts of problems with the audio stuff. So we have some scripts that you can use to make it run on a Pi. The best thing you can do with a Raspberry Pi, though, is to use it as a remote server. And there's a piece of software called Virtual Here. So instead of running hideously expensive LMR 400, however many 100 yards it is down to your shack or where your tower or whatever it is, you can put a Raspberry Pi on one of these things out there, and you can just run Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable back into the house. And by running that virtual hear software on the Pi, when you fire up our software on Windows, it just sees it as a USB peripheral. And it's a damn sight cheaper than buying those USB repeater cables that can be hideously expensive. So there's lots of things you can do with it. Anything else on here? I talked about spectrum analyzers already. We do have a fantastic support community. Most of the stuff I showed earlier in the applications were things that our users had done. I was completely blown away when I started looking on the Facebook groups, which I think are about 14,000 members now. And a lot of this stuff is driven by the user community. They're using our black boxes in ways we never thought would be possible. And the community is great. They're very helpful. Quite often, another user can provide better support than we can at the factory because they've actually done something. I mean, there's no way we can do all the different applications. I've become known as I'm the Mac and the pan adapter guy. That's my forte in life. My colleague Mike, he's the guy that does the well, he's a real ham, not a fake one like me. He actually, gets on the air and uses it and plays on the nets. I just listen to the nets because I'm basically a listening kind of guy. But I will tell you something, even if you don't have a rig right now, this is a very inexpensive way to get into listening to all the activities that go on amateur radio. Even if you can't get on the mic and talk back, at least you can monitor what's going on the nets. Or you can monitor different bands. The key to me was I was an SWL guy. Beyond shortwave, I had no idea anything else existed. I got one of these and I'm going through all the bands and I'm seeing all the stuff we can do. And like I say, digital modes, whoa, what's that? Well, the other day I'm doing FT8 and stuff. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So what else have I got to bore you with before we get into some demonstrations? Okay, this is like product pitch stuff. Basically, I told you we can look at 10 megahertz of bandwidth at once. The RSP1A can do that. We have another box called an RSPDX, which is similar, but it's in a metal case and it has 3 inputs. So it's got an antenna switch built in. I can do that too. And then the Duo, which is this fella here, it's got multiple inputs, but it also effectively has 2 distinct tuners in it. So you can either look at 10 megahertz of spectrum, or you can look at 2 chunks of 2 megahertz. So you could have like one window down at HF, another one at VHF at the same time, which is pretty cool. Okay, enough of this. So this is an example of what it can do. So you see, you actually running our software twice, and you're looking at 2 vastly different frequencies at the same time. What else have I got? Okay, so I mentioned this already. This is ADSB again. That's a map of received aircraft transponders. And here we're listening to air traffic control. Not very active, but there's a little bit of stuff going on there. Diversity tuning, because we've got 2 tuners. And this is a big plus if you're into this kind of thing. You can connect 2 separate antennas to this thing, and it will automatically tune for the best signal to noise ratio. Or you can manually, using that circular thing, you can adjust the relative phase and amplitude between the tuners and null out a very strong interfering station. It's really cool stuff. Only the Duo can do that because you need 2 tuners to do that, and they have to be in sync. You can't use 2 of these because they're talking asynchronously over USB, so you've got no idea what the phase relationship is. Here they come out over the same USB port. Okay, Steve, quit doing product pitches. The DX, I mentioned it's got 3 inputs. It's got a new trick that we just concocted called HDR, for high dynamic range. Basically, it becomes equivalent to a single conversion receiver below 2 megahertz. And if you're anyone into non-directional beacons and stuff, the old aircraft beacons, which are being decommissioned all the time, but they transmit an identifier in Morse code and stuff. There are some people that like to do that. There are some people that have, enormous loop on ground stuff going on, and all the way down into VLF. This is great. It's also good for AMDXs and stuff like that. A story I like to tell about this is I did tell you I was from England. You got that impression. I'm not really a Texan. So one of the most famous radio stations, broadcast stations in the UK is used to be called the Home Service. Transmits 1,500 meters on long wave. It's actually 198 kilohertz is the frequency. It's now called Radio 4. I used to go, well, I still go camping a lot, but I used to carry around a little Sony portable shortwave because I suddenly realized it was just as sensitive as that big old Yaesu I had sitting on the desktop. And it was much easier to take it camping and throw out a blue wire antenna or something and listen to the BBC World Service. Anyway, ever since I moved to Texas originally, and every time I had a radio going, I'd try and tune 198 kilohertz and see if I could hear Radio 4. Never could until I got my DX. And using my mag loop antenna I described earlier at home, I could actually copy Radio 4 from the UK on 198 kilohertz. Again, blew my mind that you could do that. Wasn't very good. You wouldn't sit there and try and listen to the last night of the Proms concert or anything. You know, it's the usual, you know, the fading, but that gives you some indication of how good the DX. I don't have a DX here, but I may show you how it works in a bit. So software, we talked about software already. Let's see, there's SDR Uno is our software at the top, SDR console I mentioned on the left, Cubic SDR on the right, and HD SDR on the bottom. Our offering for Windows is very strong. We're somewhat weaker for Mac, somewhat weaker than that for Linux until we get that fixed. But basically, if you want whatever operating system you care to use, there is some software you can use to work with these radios. Okay, this is really cool. I talked about multiple VFOs. I got sidetracked into that earlier. Here's an example of why you might want to use them. This is a single tuner device, but we've got 3 virtual receivers set up. And for each one, you know, the basic display in Uno is supposed to look like the front of a regular rig. Okay, so you've got numbers for entering frequencies and doing bands, and you can select modes, AM, FM, single sideband, and so on. So you could take 3 VRXs, and this gets back to your question from way back, Lauren, if you can remember what it was. I just remembered. So what you can do is you can take each virtual receiver, and that one's kind of hidden, so I'll show this one. There's a settings button here, and if you hit settings, you can select what the output goes to. So normally, if you're just listening to voice, you send it to the speakers on your computer. If you're trying to do something like, this looks like slow scan TV, you can tune to an SSTV frequency. You can send the output from this virtual receiver down a virtual audio cable into something that can decode SSTV. Simultaneously, you can take another VRX, set its output to go down another virtual audio cable into some sort of, I can't even see what this is. That's WSJTX. So you can be monitoring FT8 and stuff at the same time. You can do all this at once. How many people have got a fairly old HF rig and they wish they could afford to buy one of those fancy ones with the built-in Spectrum displays and all that stuff? And why don't you put down the money and buy it? Too much? Space is another one. So here's another deal. I mentioned I got a Kenwood. It's a 590 SG. No fancy displays. It's just a solid transceiver by all accounts. But you don't want to tune the dial until you hear someone going CQ. So I can sync it up to this box. I can display the frequencies on there. And I can see where the signals are. Not only that, I can use it to decode RTTY broadcasts or any of the fancy modes that the big boxes can do. I can do with this box and free software. So you don't need to spend all that money and take up all that space. And on some of them, I know some of them now have an HDMI out from the back of the rig, so you can put it on a big monitor, which makes it easy to see. Like the ICOM 7300 is a great radio. Anyone got one? They're awesome, aren't they? You know what, though? These are the two pairs of glasses I wear right now. These I have to wear to look at this. These I have to wear when I'm driving. Definitely need at least these looking at the front panel of that icon. Jeez, it's tiny. Okay. So you can take the output of that and put it on a bigger display. I think it has HDMI already on it, doesn't it? Yeah. So you can put it on a TV screen, but you're basically seeing the same thing that you had on the front of the radio. Whereas on my Kenwood, I can be working 20 meters and I can be looking at 30 meters, 40 meters on the computer screen to see if it's active. And I can preview it on the computer and listen. And if I decide I want to work that frequency, there's a magic button in each VRX here called RSYN, Rig Sync 1. If I press the Rig Sync 1 button, that will tune my rig to that frequency shown on that VRX, which is pretty cool. So I know some of the other fancy rigs have the ability, they will sell you a pan adapter board to let you look at the full spectrum. I don't know what they cost. I don't remember seeing one for anything less than $500. That sound about right? Screw it. Take any rig you like. Pan adapter, $100 sold. Our software's free, by the way. And I'm not putting down the big rig guys either. I mean, like I say, I love the 7300. I'd be tempted to buy one myself one of these days because, you know, it's small enough. You can carry it around, do stuff with it. It's really nice. Here's another one. Scanning. The scanning feature was added because everybody said they wanted it, primarily for doing things like airband frequencies and stuff. So you know how a scanner works. So it'll just scan along and it will stop when it finds an active frequency and so on. And what you can tell it to do is we've also got these things called memory banks. And you can specify that when it finds a signal, it saves the frequency to the memory bank. So you just let the thing scan and scan and scan, and over a period of time, it'll probably pick up every ATC frequency and use where you are, and you'll suddenly have that in a memory bank. Some of those frequencies will be ATIS frequencies, right? So all you're doing is hearing weather, you know, tell the tower you got information, Charlie, or whatever, and all that stuff. You don't want to keep stopping on that. So there's a little flag, yes or N for yes or no. You can lock out those frequencies you don't want to stop on. So you're only stopping on actual transmissions, either from ATC or from the pilot himself. And instead of scanning the entire airband, you can scan just the frequencies you've saved in this memory bank. Pretty cool. What you can do as well is you can have as many memory banks as you like. So you could have one, say, for all the local AM broadcast stations. You could have one for all the frequencies you normally work on 20 meters or something. Or you could have all the net frequencies in a memory bank. All the nets you like to listen to, put them in a memory bank. And then you can let the scanner just go through and you'll hear when the net control guy comes on and you say, oh, that guy, he's just reading a script. I'm going to screw with him. Radio check. So anyway, that's what you can do with that. We got another one. Oh yeah, plugins. Plugins. I want to demonstrate a plugin to you. So there's only so much we could do with the SDR Uno software ourselves. So we implemented a plugin system to allow third-party people to write plugins that work with our software. And that's what we've got here. So what you see, if you look at the frequency, you can't read it obviously on the screen there, but if you look at the frequency spectrum there, you can see there's annotations appearing. And that was one of the first plugins that a fellow by the name of Eric Cottrell wrote for SDR Uno, and he can download frequency databases, SWSCEDs or EIBI, if you're familiar with those. But basically, they're just databases of which stations are on which frequencies. And you can import that into the Fran plugin. And then when you have this thing up on the screen, it will identify what stations you're listening to. Another really cool feature. Any of you guys do DX clusters? No? Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a DX cluster plugin as well, which is pretty cool. You'll enjoy that. You can open up that plugin. You can specify which cluster you're interested in working. Decoders. I think I mentioned Black Cat Software down in Florida. They do SSTV, weather facts. They've got a DX toolkit. The bad thing about their software is you have to pay for it. And one thing I've noticed is hams are notoriously cheap people, right? Now he's going to throw me out, everybody. Yeah, you got a question.
First, I say thank you to ask.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
The same thing. MR, or IS.
Not as a plugin, but using third party like WSJTX and stuff. DMR is DSD Plus software decodes that. Now, there's a free version of DSD Plus, but I understand the version you want is called DSD Plus Fastlane, and there is some sort of subscription model associated with it. I think that's what you need for DMR. Couldn't tell you for sure if it does D-Star or not. I'd have to look that up. Okay. Yeah.
You talk about, well, obviously you got different feed this box. Is there any concern about too much power on?
Absolutely. There's a lot of concern. Okay. This is where I get to tell you my little story. I told you I work for Texas Instruments. I worked for them for what, 17 years or something. So I know a little bit about electronics. Okay. What isn't widely known outside the semiconductor industry is that all electronics works on smoke. And if you transmit into the receiver input of this thing or close by it, there's a little thing called near field coupling, right? And if too much energy goes in through this socket, it melts the plastic inside on the components and the smoke comes out and it don't work no more. It is also not covered under warranty. We don't get many back anymore like we used to. When it first came out, there were quite a few who come back and people would say, "No, I didn't transmit into it. I didn't do anything, like that." And the first thing I do when a unit comes back that's supposedly not working, I pick it out of the box. You can smell right away if the smoke's come out. Then I open it up. And we've got protection diodes in here, and I look at the protection diodes, and you can see the plastic. It's been like a volcano has erupted. I take a picture, I send it back to the guy. So you didn't transmit it to me, huh? Either that or it was a direct lightning strike. And then I have to tell him, sorry, no warranty on it. It's just not covered. I'll tell you what, though, if it comes back in, if you got like a nearby lightning strike, it's possible to damage it without physically leaving any evidence. If there's an element of doubt, I'll give you a replacement. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about, because it often comes up, is people say, well, these things aren't protected. Yes, they are protected. Then people say, well, it's not protected as well as my HF rig. I'm listening on one rig and I'm transmitting on the one next to it and it never blows up or anything. Well, the fact of the matter is we get back to basic physics again. This thing goes up to 2 gigahertz. So if we put great big protection diodes inside, like you might have on an HF rig, that could dissipate vast amounts of power, any guess what the capacitance they would have and what that would do to the frequency response at 2 gigahertz? You ain't going to get there, okay? So, yes, they're small. The maximum continuous input power this thing is spec'd at is 1 milliwatt or 0 dBm. For transient reasons, 10 milliwatts. And I did a little video and an app note that's on our website. And I may even have some slides. Let me see if I can get some stuff to show you. There's a bunch of features. Pan adapters. Here we go. So this is where it comes up mostly because you're wanting to use it to display the spectrum next to your rig. So and it's really cool. I mentioned 3 different bands. Okay, here we go. Let me put my glasses on, see what I wrote here. See if I still understand it. So There's a couple of ways you can do it. Most people will want to share the same antenna that they're using on their HF rig with this. So the question is, how do I protect it so that when I can receive signals and see them on that, but when I transmit, I don't transmit into that? And there's a couple of ways of doing it. Lower right, that's my Kenwood 590 SG. It's got an output on the back. Essentially just mirrors what comes in through the RX input. And then it's got an internal transmit receive switch, which isolates it when you're transmitting. So the rig itself prevents strong signals going into there. A lot of Yaesus are similar to on the left. It varies from model to model, though. But some of them have an RX out to RX in loop through, which you can use for putting external processing and stuff. You can take that and you can tap that through a splitter and feed that signal to your RSP. Again, this is isolated from the transmitter when you transmit through internal TR switching. And then on the upper right is the universal solution, if you will, to have an external TR switch. And I know some people like MFJ, some people don't like them quite so much. Some people have unfortunate interpretations of what MFJ stands for. Nobody here. Anyway, MFJ have worked well with us. And when we started introducing these, we started looking at how people were trying to protect using external TR switches. And we gave them some specifications for how they could improve it. And they've got this thing called the MFJ 1708-SDR. And what that does is when you're receiving, it takes the signal from the antenna, it puts it through a matching network and sends half the signal to the RSP and the other half to your rig, and you can use it as normal. When you transmit, when you go into transmit mode, it isolates the output that goes to the SDR and grounds its input and puts a direct feed from the antenna output on your rig to the antenna, so you get no additional signal loss. So that's a good way of protecting it. A caution on this, the MFJ switch claims to be RF sensing, and indeed it is, but I wouldn't trust it. Okay, I regard that as my insurance policy. What I would prefer to do is take a PTT output from the rig, something that gets grounded when you transmit, something, for example, that you might use to drive a linear, if you've got a linear on there, or some other function. Different radios call it different things. Some radios call it TX ground. Some call it PTT out. But you can take that control signal from the rig and feed it into, there's a control plug on the top of the MFJ switch. And so what happens is when you transmit, that pin goes low, takes the control low to the MFJ switch, and it isolates the RSP and connects your rig to the transmitter. Okay, so that's how you get protection. There are similar TR switches available from DX Engineering. RTR2, I think, is the one you have to play with. I think you might need to add an external splitter. If you're handy, Bob, you told me you're an electronics guru, right? Okay, that's what you studied. Yeah. So anyway, if you happen to be someone that where the words Dow key has some meaning to you, or you know about relays and soldering irons and stuff, you can make your own TR switches very cheaply. If you want to buy off the shelf, though, the MFJ one is probably the best way to go, unless your rig has got stuff built in. There's another scenario where you might have a different receive-only antenna for the RSP, separate from the one you transmit on your rig. That's where the near-field coupling comes in, okay? There are calculators you can get, but you have to bear in mind what the frequencies are, what the relative physical location is. And then, as all things that are calculated tend to be a little bit of this at the end of the day, I have a different approach that I did a video on. And what I did was I got a little handy talkie somewhere, which I must admit, I'm ashamed I have not programmed to the local repeaters yet. And I think somewhere on here I've got, what's that thing called? The little programming thing? Chirp, yeah. I got Chirp on here, which will probably tell me it needs to be updated 15,000 times since I last used it. I I need to update it. But what I did was I took my handy talkie and I tuned the receiver to the same frequency I was on. And I kept pressing the PTT button and going, radio check. No, I just hit it up to get some carrier, and I looked at what happens on the screen, and then I went outside because I mean I was inside. This thing was connected, you know, to coax feed line to the antenna outside, so I shouldn't be picking up too much. Even the plastic boxes we have are coated with a conductive paint on the inside. So then I took it outside and I'm keying this thing up and I'm holding it up as close as I can get to my disco antenna and trying to see what it says on the screen. And one of the key things about SDR Uno is, and as far as I know, it's the only SDR software out there that's calibrated. So the vertical axis is not just dBs, which on most SDRs is like dB full scale for the A to D or something like that, or just an arbitrary dB scale. Ours says dBm. So if you can keep keying this thing up and get closer and closer to the receive antenna, and you don't see that signal going anywhere near 0 dBm, you're good. Alternatively, if you're in the shack and you've got your rig there, you know, turn the transmit power way down, key it up, see how big the signal is on the screen, and then progressively increase it and see if you get close to that 0 dBm number. Chances are you won't, unless that transmitting antenna is right on top of the receiving antenna. And as a further example of this, I've done a lot of demos in various HRO stores around the country and at shows. So I'm normally doing this, and there are people keying up all around me, you know, especially there'll be a station set up just for the event, right? And I look at it and boom, you know, it's dancing all over the screen. So I change the scale. It very rarely gets anywhere near 0 dBm. But I have to warn you, because it's not under warranty if you blow it. And if I open it up and I see you've blown it, it's sorry, you know. But they are not as fragile as people sometimes think when they read the box that says do not operate near a transmitting antenna. They're protected as much as we can and still have the frequency span. And we expect, you know, people to use some intelligence. Some people say, well, I'm just going to use an antenna switch and switch it back and forth. That's just an accident that's going to happen. And I don't care. It's not just people like me that are absent-minded. Sooner or later, you're going to blow it. And I've had other people that have sent them back in. It's like, hey, you know, I'm sorry, I blew it. What can I do? Can you repair it? Funnily enough, we've got 2 repair centers in the US that will repair our RSPs. And the one in Florida, at least, I think, we've got the info on our website anyway, but he charges like $60 to look at the radio. And if you have him go ahead and repair it, his flat rate is still only $60 plus whatever components he needs to replace, which is, you know, I mean, okay, this is $100 radio. This thing is usually, I think, like $280. So that's pretty reasonable repair cost, I think, much cheaper than buying a new one. I got that wrong. If I was a decent marketing guy, I'd say, transmit into your radio, blow it up and go buy a new one every week. But let's see, you're probably fed up with hearing me by now. Is there anything else in here? Okay, so, good. We have got tons of stuff on our website. I talked about the videos I've done and Mike's done, and even the programming guys that know more about that stuff. We've actually got people in the company that do speak Linux and all that stuff. Andy is brilliant. The Facebook groups are fantastic. I mentioned that already. We're on groups.io. By the way, we don't run the Facebook groups. In fact, we don't run any of the groups. We used to have our own forums on our own website, but now everything that's out there is independent. We monitor it as best we can. We've got troubleshoot. These are the Facebook groups on there. We monitor the groups as much as we can, but we've got our own help system, and we've got a ticket system for support. Our units have a serial number on the bottom. We like you to register the units mainly so that if you want tech support, we can see if there are any identified issues with those serial numbers. You can download our software and use it without registering if you don't want to. You don't have to. We respond very quickly. I don't think we've ever taken more than 24 hours to get back to someone that's come in with a support ticket. The help thing walks you through some scenarios where we ask you what operating system, which model you have, and all that, and all the common things that people have. So there's tons of good stuff. There's our company website. You can do email. I really recommend, if you want support, to go through the ticket system. I know a lot of people, because they've seen me, they say, I remember that Steve guy. So they'll send me an email or whatever, which is fine. But I noticed that the Starship launch got canceled this morning. Now they're shooting for Thursday. If it gets pushed out to next week, I may say to hell with it and jump in the RV and go down to Boca Chica to see that launch. If I'm doing that, I'm probably not going to be answering an email that you've got a problem with your RSP. But if you're in the ticket system, it's not just me. It's Mike down in Florida. It's the guys back in the UK. We'll look at those tickets and you'll get a response. So we'd like to take care of you. We want you to be happy. I mentioned you can buy them from HRO. If we have time, I would like to try and demonstrate something. Is that okay with you guys? Yes, sir.
Before you get started, would you provide the pricing of the 3 months?
Yeah, although HRO usually has them on sale, the RSP 1A is, I think their regular price is $119. Don't quote me on it. They may have dropped it for all I know. They were at $119. That's with free shipping. You could get them for more like $100 if you order direct from our website in the UK. But then you're going to pay more than the difference in shipping to get it over here, and you'll have a wait. Whereas if you get it from HRO, they'll take it back within 14 days, full credit, no questions asked. The next model up is the RSP DX, and that's the one that always gets me confused. I think that probably sells for, again, don't quote me on it, $180.
$214.95, right?
$214.95. They need to reduce that. That's too high. They have sales on them all the time. And then, okay, so the RSP Duo is $280. Yeah, $289.95. But the nice thing is, when we've got the Dayton ham shows coming up next month, they always run specials for the shows. And you don't have to be at the show to get the show special price. It'll be on their website. Yeah, they're too high. They need to drop that price. No, it doesn't make sense if you look at the capabilities of the units. It pushes it up too close to the Duo. But anyway, we're not allowed to tell them what to sell for. We can give them a recommended price, and then it's up to them. So, yeah, what I would like to do, how many of you have seen SDR Uno running? I've shown you some screenshots. Okay, so you're familiar with it, so I don't necessarily need to do that. Let me instead show you something on this computer here, which was mentioned in the presentation, but this is where I'm going to be. What are we seeing? Oh, we're still seeing that. Okay, let me bring up another piece of software here.
You can stop the share and then start it with a new.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do once I get the software running.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Stop share, and let's share this again. And okay, here we go. Share. Okay, so this is SDR Connect, which has been delayed more than we would like. Ever since when we first introduced the RSPs, by the way, we didn't do any software with it whatsoever. We designed it to work with HD SDR and SDR console, and Cubic was just coming along. We're a hardware company. We're not supposed to be in the software business. But what happened was, as we refined our model range, we realized that software out there could not exploit the full advantages of the hardware, or the authors were slow to exploit the advantages of the hardware. So we bought a piece of software called Studio One, I think it was called. It was written by a guy in Italy, and we bought the rights to his software. And then we spent the next, 3 or 4 years basically wrapping it around our RSPs to give the best possible performance. So that took care of the Windows community. And then, of course, the Mac people, and the Mac people have got a good voice within the company. Me, because I'm a Mac guy. Okay. Then the Linux people, they're just rude. Yeah. Why don't you have this for Linux? Well, sir, what's the Linux market share versus Windows and Mac? You know, be nice. Maybe we'll help you. But we've got some people that do Linux, okay? And there are some very helpful people out there, and they've done it. But it did rub us the wrong way a little bit that people, I mean, seriously, there were some really rude people claiming that we shouldn't be doing SDR Uno unless we had it for Linux as well. It's like, so let me get this right. You want us to penalize 99.9% of our users because we don't have software you can use on your Linux box. Now, that's not fair. That's not fair. So we have been trying to develop something that runs on multiple platforms. We also wanted something, I mentioned using a Raspberry Pi as a sort of network capable thing. SDR console is a very good, it's got a network server thing built in, which is nice. We did a TCP server, which was kind of a kludgy kind of thing. So we had two main goals. We wanted to do software that was multi-platform and network capable. And it's called SDR Connect. This is an early version of it right here. They all look fairly similar, don't they? The first thing to notice is this is actually running on a Mac, which is good. It's the software. We were supposed to have it out by the end of last year. There were inevitable delays. Some of the delays were caused by this black box here. It's very hard to cope with two tuners in one box, apparently. Part of it was caused by COVID. Some of our programmers got sick. And our lead programmer has been sick again recently and has been in the emergency room back in the UK. So we've got to cut him some slack. And we also get criticized a lot for, well, why don't we release it now? It's like, well, what's the point in giving you something that doesn't work? You know, we'll get there as soon as we can. It's not in our interest to hold back any longer than we have to. So this is what SDR Connect looks like. I thought I had two servers running back in my rental house, but apparently I don't because I have a Mac Mini, which is running with an RSP1A, I think, but it doesn't seem like it wants to talk to me. So I also have an M1, which is the ARM-powered Apple Silicon Mac. I have one of those running at the house. So let's see what happens if I hit play. This, I believe, is running on an RSP-DX. Yes, so I have a choice of antenna B. I've actually got a small active loop running on that. And I don't know if we'll hear anything here or not. This is just a local FM station. Where did I want to go here? What was it, 99 point something? I'm not used to where all the stations are around here. Isn't this the local rock and roll station? I think my audio is muted anyway. But anyway, what I'm doing here is, I mean, it's basic SDR stuff, right? You can see the spectrum. You can see the waterfall. This is running in, we need to think of a better name for it. We call it mode 2, as opposed to mode 1. Mode 1 works really good on a gigabit LAN, where you send a full IQ data stream. Remember, these things, you can be spitting out 14 bits of data times 2 for 2 ADCs at over, 20 mega samples per second or something to get a 10 megahertz sampling rate. You need a lot of bandwidth to do that. And over the internet at large, you're not going to get there. Okay. So we have a mode called mode 2, where we just do a sampling of what the waveform looks like. And we send just the audio signal across the network. And that's why you're not seeing the auxiliary spectrum and stuff there. It's going to have somewhat basic functionality when it first comes out, but it will support all of our RSPs. This is the RSP1A, which is the entry-level one. Before this, 7 years ago, we had something called an RSP1. The RSP1 will not work with this software, but everything else we've made does. Even the old RSP2 that's been discontinued will work with it. So I did demos in Dayton where I had it hooked up to a server located back in the UK. I mean, it's really dynamic. So you can do just about anything you want. It will have the basic functionality. You can pick the modes. It'll have band select buttons and stuff. It won't have all the fancy things like scanning and memory banks. It has a sort of plug-in architecture, which I think we're calling modules now, where we will be releasing modules on a fairly regular basis that will get you into pan adapters and will get you into scanning and get you into anything else. And also the third-party guys can rewrite their modules to work with this. It's interesting that oh, it is moving slowly. It's updating much more on this screen. Yeah, I mean it's a bit jerky on the. Trust me, it looks better than that on here. So really, what I wanted to do was show you Connect is a real thing. Some people said, no, you're not really doing it. You're just buying time. No, it's real. It's not vaporware. It exists. It runs on a Mac. In this case, I'm running, well, this is an Intel Mac talking to an M1 Mac server. I can run it on here too. I think for time, I'm not going to bother cranking this up. What I wanted to, because it's kind of pointless, because you know vaguely what SDR Uno does anyway. But I was going to show you that I could pick up those aircraft transponders at 1.09 gigahertz on my blue wire antenna in here. That's what I did before we started, and I got one transponder there. But I mean, there's really no point in showing you that. I would encourage you to go to our website. We have, along with the help, there's something called applications and video catalog or something like that. And there's literally hundreds of articles telling you how to do anything you want. ACARS decoding, how to set up pan adapters, how to use it with Ham Radio Deluxe, how to use multi-PSK, how to set up virtual COM ports, how to set up virtual audio cables. You can search it for whatever you're interested in. It will give you a list of either YouTube videos or PDF application notes you can download. You can go to our YouTube channel and you can kind of scan through that. We've got very basic videos that say, hey, I just got one of these things. I just took it out of the box. What do I do next? It walks you through downloading the software, getting it up and running. SDR Uno is very capable software, and it has quite a big learning curve. But the trick is not to try and do everything at once. So in the basic thing, I tell people, close that memory panel. You don't need it. There are some weird settings windows. Close them. You don't need that. I don't even use them myself. My colleague Mike, I mean, he's big into twiddling all the knobs and everything else. I'm a real KISS kind of person. You know, I get rid of all that crap I don't need. All I need to do is see the frequency. Yeah, I can play with notch filters a little bit, but I can do that from the GUI, which is nice. So it's only as complicated as it has to be. And if you take it in easy steps, you know, I walk you through how to get it running for the first time, and then just give yourself little tutorials and go one module by the next until you're familiar with it. And Lauren, you have one of these hooked up as a pan adapter, right? And you're never going to go back, right? I mean, I don't know if I sound like I'm just hyping stuff to try and sell it. I mean, the fact is, whether it's one of mine or an AirSpy or a dongle, once you've used these, you're never going to go back. If you've got a rig, especially if it doesn't have any sort of band scope on it, it's almost essential. And these can be set up to work with any rig. I'm turning 100 this year, but at least people don't look at me now. Other hams don't look at me like I smell as bad as they used to when I first started, when I didn't have any call sign at all. So again, I got sidetracked. If you're new to all this, what better way than to get a huge wideband coverage receiver? And if you don't want to be net control or whatever, you can listen to the net on this and see whether Bob was telling you the truth or not. Or you can listen to, there's lots of nets on HF. I mean, you can dabble, you can play in whatever field is there. I haven't done half the stuff this box will do. You know, it's mind boggling, and not wishing to offend anybody, but I swear This is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So I think that's all I wanted to do. I'll be happy. I know we've had quite a bit of attrition already, but there's still more people in the room than I expected to show up tonight. Now, next time, if I'm invited to speak again, there's a big if, I know, it'll probably only be about a few hardcore people. Seriously, if I did offend anybody, I do apologize. Everything I say is in jest. This hobby is supposed to be fun. I work for SDRPlay, but I do it on a fun basis. Sure, the money helps, but I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't fun. It's not my regular job. I'm officially retired and everything. So if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. Okay? And again, thank you for graciously inviting me up here. And Lauren, I will get you back. What do you-
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.